I never imagined that I would write something like this. My name is Dorothy, I'm 42 years old, I'm married, a mother of two, and I work as an accountant. My life had always been ordinary, nothing out of the ordinary. I was never the type to believe in supernatural things. I always thought that near-death experiences were just hallucinations of a brain under stress. But after what I experienced on October 3rd, 2023, I can't think that way anymore. Because I died, and I came back. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I woke up early, had breakfast, kissed my husband, and went to work as usual. I spent the day taking care of errands, checking reports, and anxiously waiting for the time to go home. When my time finally came, I gathered my things, got into my car, and began the drive back home. The traffic was slower than usual, but nothing that worried me. I turned on the radio and tried to relax. Then it happened. A deafening noise, a huge shadow at the corner of my vision, and before I could react, I felt a devastating impact. An out-of-control truck hit my car head-on. Everything spun around. I heard the sound of metal twisting, then silence. Total darkness. I don't know how long I remained in that darkness. There was no pain, no sound, nothing, just an absolute void. But suddenly, something changed. I felt a strange lightness, as if I were floating, and then I realized I could see. But what I saw made me doubt my own sanity. I was above the scene of the accident, looking down. I saw my car completely destroyed, glass and metal scattered across the asphalt. I saw people around, some standing, shocked, others running to try to help, and then I saw my own body. I was there, lying, motionless. The paramedics had already arrived and were trying to revive me. One of them was doing chest compressions, while another was shouting something. That didn't make sense. I was there, and at the same time, I was here. Fear began to take hold of me. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I tried to touch something around me, but it was as if I had no body. I just existed, like a disembodied consciousness in the air. Then I realized something even stranger. I wasn't alone. There was someone there, just a few meters away from me. When I turned to look, my heart, if I still had one, nearly stopped. It was my mother, who had passed away years before. She was there, standing, looking at me with a calm expression. She wore something light, almost radiant, and she looked younger than when she left. Her eyes conveyed a peace I couldn't understand. I wanted to run to her, hug her, ask what was happening. But before I could react, an intense light appeared all around me, completely enveloping me. And then I was taken to another place. The transition was instantaneous. There was no tunnel, no sensation of movement, just a sudden leap from where I was to this new environment. Suddenly, I found myself surrounded by a light so intense that, under any other circumstances, I would have instinctively closed my eyes. But there, for some reason, it didn't hurt to look. On the contrary, that light embraced me in a way I had never experienced before. It was warm, but not like physical heat, rather like something that penetrated my very essence, bringing an indescribable peace. For a moment, I completely forgot about the accident, about my body stretched on the asphalt, the distant sirens. All of that seemed distant, irrelevant. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. Then I realized I wasn't alone. There was a presence before me. It wasn't just someone standing there. It was something much greater, something that filled everything around. I can't explain how, but the moment I perceived that presence, I knew who it was. I didn't need to ask, I didn't need confirmation. I was in the presence of Jesus, but not in the way I had imagined, not as in the images and paintings I had seen throughout my life. He wasn't a man with specific features, nor was he simply a human figure. He was light, presence, pure love. There were no words being spoken, but I understood everything. I felt everything, and at that moment I knew that nothing else mattered. No pain, no fear, no doubt. I was in his presence, and that was enough. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, to say that I wasn't ready to die. But before I could even form a coherent thought, something happened. I can't explain how, but it was as if he took my hand, even without touching me, and led me to see something beyond. Everything around me began to change. The light remained, but now I saw images forming before me. At first, they were just shadows, vague shapes, but soon everything became clearer. What I saw sent chills from my head to my toes. It was the world, the same world I knew, but covered by a dense, dark fog that spread over entire cities like living smoke. And that smoke whispered. Yes, I could hear. There were low, constant voices that seemed to enter people's minds without them even noticing. I observed the streets, the houses, the buildings, and I saw people walking normally, unsuspecting. They went about their routines, worked, had fun, argued, but they didn't realize they were being influenced. I saw couples arguing for no apparent reason. I saw children absorbed by bright screens. I saw politicians giving speeches while this smoke enveloped them, as if it breathed every word into their ears. I saw people trapped in addictions, in hatred, in fear, and I realized that none of that was natural. That black fog was spreading lies, inciting violence, distorting truths, and worst of all, no one noticed. They believed that their decisions were their own, that their feelings were spontaneous, but now I clearly saw that something was manipulating it all. And in that moment, I understood. Humanity's greatest battle was not against flesh and blood. The scene before me kept expanding, and the more I saw, the tighter my heart felt. Now I could perceive figures hidden within that dark fog. They weren't people, but something different, like shadows moving too quickly for me to fully identify them. I didn't know what they were, but I knew what they did. They hovered around people, whispering in their ears, manipulating their thoughts, pushing them toward anger, despair, and illusion. Some of these figures seemed to feed on the confusion and suffering they caused, while others simply observed, as if they were waiting for something. All this was happening alongside ordinary people, workers, mothers, children, but no one noticed. It was as if they were blind to the true war happening around them. Jesus did not speak to me in words, but I understood everything instantly. That was the true conflict of humanity. It wasn't just political problems, economic crises, or ideological differences. All of that was a consequence of something much greater, something operating in the unseen. I saw how distraction and entertainment were used as weapons, how technology was shaped to keep people too busy to question what was happening around them. I saw news being manipulated, leaders being guided by forces they themselves didn't understand. All of that formed a great scene of deception, an illusion built to keep humanity imprisoned without even knowing it was a prison. And in that moment, a frightening truth formed in my mind. The world as we know it is not what it seems. I wanted to look away, to deny what I was seeing, but I couldn't. It was as if every detail of that vision was being imprinted inside me, as if my spirit was being forced to confront the truth that had always been there, but that I had never noticed. And then, something changed. The dark fog began to concentrate in certain points, and before me emerged images of leaders, of public figures, of influential people in different fields. I saw businessmen, artists, politicians, intellectuals, all surrounded by that whispering darkness. Some seemed completely dominated, like puppets merely repeating what was whispered into their minds. Others seemed to resist, but suffered incessant attacks, as if they were targets of an invisible war. The realization hit me at that moment. This battle wasn't just to keep people distracted, it was a contest for souls. The revelation struck me like a shock. Everything made sense. The chaos, the division, the constant fear that people felt without knowing exactly why. All of that wasn't random. Wasn't just the result of bad governments or hard times. It was something planned. The world was being prepared for something greater, something I still couldn't completely comprehend, but that was approaching every day. I saw entire societies being manipulated, led to believe they were evolving, when in fact they were blindly walking into a trap. I saw how people were convinced to hate each other over artificial differences, how they were encouraged to exchange what is real for what is fabricated, to disconnect from the truth in the name of comfort. And above all, I realized how the enemy's greatest trick was making sure no one noticed that he existed. I felt a mix of terror and clarity. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and now I saw what had always been hidden. But at the same time, one thought took over me. If all this was true, if this invisible war was really happening around us, why was no one doing anything? Why did people simply go about their lives without questioning, without seeing what was right in front of them? Then I saw something even more disturbing. Some people were able to notice, even if only vaguely. They felt that something was wrong, that the world was heading towards something dangerous. I saw journalists trying to expose truths. I saw scientists questioning certain narratives. I saw spiritual leaders trying to warn about the deceptions around us. But almost all of them were silenced, discredited, ridiculed. It was as if anyone who tried to open people's eyes was quickly smothered by that dark fog. And it was at that moment that Jesus showed me something I will never forget. Amid all that darkness, there were points of light. Small, scattered, but extremely intense. These lights were not just awakened people, they were those who still resisted control, those who, even without understanding everything, had not bowed to the lies. I saw mothers and fathers teaching their children to question what they saw. I saw teachers struggling to keep education based on truth. I saw small communities where people still helped each other genuinely, without hidden agendas. They were few, but they were there, and I realized that the dark fog couldn't easily extinguish that light. The battle was uneven, but it wasn't lost. There was resistance. Even in the midst of all that revelation, I still couldn't completely understand the purpose of showing me all of this. Why me? Why now? What should I do with this information? As if reading my thoughts, Jesus made me see something even deeper. I saw time moving forward. It wasn't like an ordinary vision, but as if I were being transported to a future that hadn't yet happened. And what I saw made me shudder. The world I knew no longer existed in the same way. The streets seemed quieter. People didn't look at each other. They just went about their routines with downcast eyes. There was no physical money, no spontaneous interactions. Everything was mediated by technology. Small devices under the skin connected people to a single system. Transactions, access, even entry into certain places depended on it. At first, it seemed convenient. I saw how people accepted it without resistance, enchanted by the practicality. They didn't need to carry cards. They didn't need to worry about passwords or bureaucracy. But then, I realized the price. Those who refused to accept this new form of control were gradually excluded. I saw a man trying to pay for something in a market, but his device wouldn't authorize the payment. The employee looked at him with pity, as if she knew there was nothing she could do. I saw children growing up in this system without knowing any other reality, without even questioning. And then I saw something even worse, a leader. A charismatic figure, well-dressed with a friendly smile and words that promised peace and security. The crowds followed him, idolized him, but behind that benevolent image, there was something dark. I felt it. He wasn't just a leader, he was part of the great deception. My heart ached seeing how people followed him blindly. They smiled, celebrated his words, shared his messages as if he were the answer to all the world's problems. And for a moment, I understood the danger of it all. This man didn't rule by force, but through deception. He didn't need to impose his dominance brutally because people voluntarily gave him control over their lives. He spoke of equality, of a world without divisions, without conflict, and everyone believed him. But while he spoke, I saw the shadows of the dark fog moving around him, as if they were part of him, as if his influence came from the same source that controlled the unseen world. He wasn't a simple leader. He was a symbol of what was to come, a landmark, a harbinger. Then, Jesus showed me what happened to those who refused to follow him. I saw people being pushed away, banished from society. There were no prisons, no public punishments, just total isolation. I saw a father trying to enter a building, holding his daughter's hand, but he was stopped because his device wasn't activated. I saw a woman crying because her bank account had been blocked without explanation. These people weren't imprisoned or killed. They were simply erased, and no one questioned it. It was as if they were invisible. I saw churches closing. I saw words being forbidden. I saw faith being transformed into something obsolete, a relic of a past that should be forgotten. And I realized that this had been the plan from the beginning, to make it impossible to live outside the system. Not by force, but by gradual acceptance, not by war, but by gradual conformity. The vision continued, and what I saw next left me even more anguished. The world was divided between those who accepted the system and those who resisted, but the resistance was silent, hidden, almost non-existent. I saw small groups living on the fringes of society, trying to survive without, depending on the technology that now ruled everything. They couldn't buy, couldn't sell, couldn't even exist within the laws of this new world. But at the same time, I saw something different in them. While most seemed empty, disconnected from their own humanity, these few who had rejected the system still had a sparkle in their eyes. They helped each other, shared what little they had, protected one another. They were like little lights in the midst of darkness. And it was at that moment that I understood. This was the last line of defense. Jesus made me feel something indescribable. It wasn't fear nor despair, but an urgency, as if there was still a chance for people to wake up before all of this happened. But time was short. I knew, without it needing to be said, that this wasn't a distant reality. The pieces were already moving, and humanity was rapidly heading toward that destiny without even realizing it. Then, I saw one last image before being pulled away from that experience. I saw the sky open and an even greater light descend upon the earth. I saw panic. I saw those who had followed the deception, realizing too late the mistake they had made. I saw those who resisted rising up without fear because they knew they had chosen the right path. And then everything disappeared. The light, the visions, the divine presence around me. Suddenly I was pulled back. The sensation of being pulled back was overwhelming. There was no smooth transition, no time to prepare. In an instant, I was in that divine presence, seeing revelations that would change my life forever. And in the very next moment, I was sucked back into reality. My body started to feel pain again, a searing pain, as if I had been run over by a train. And in a way, that was exactly what had happened. My lungs filled abruptly with air, and I heard voices shouting around me. I opened my eyes and saw bright, flashing lights, shadows moving quickly. I was inside an ambulance. A paramedic was holding my pulse and shouting something to the team. Another was holding my oxygen mask, and only then did I realize that I was having difficulty breathing. It took me a few seconds to understand where I was, but one thing was clear. I had returned. All of that, the light, Jesus, the visions, my mother waiting for me, had not been a dream. It was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. But there, at that moment, no one knew what I had experienced. To them, I was just another survivor of a serious accident. But for me, I had been pulled back from the brink of eternity and brought back with a purpose. My eyes burned with tears, but it wasn't just because of physical pain. It was the weight of what I now knew. How could I simply go back to normal life after seeing all that? How could I pretend that nothing had happened? In the days that followed, I tried to find a rational explanation for everything I had experienced, but there was none. The doctors told me that I had suffered a cardiac arrest at the scene of the accident, and that for a few minutes I was technically dead. They talked about cerebral hypoxia, about hallucinations that the brain can produce in extreme situations, but none of that made sense to me. It wasn't a delirium, it wasn't an illusion. I knew what I had seen, but how could I explain that to someone without seeming crazy? My family was relieved that I had survived, but every time I tried to talk about my experience, I saw skepticism in their eyes. They smiled, shook their heads, and said it was a nice dream, that I was just confused because of the trauma, but it wasn't confusion. The images were still alive inside me. At night, when I closed my eyes, I would see again the dark fog enveloping the world. I heard the whispers, felt the urgency, the truth imprinted in every scene I witnessed. I tried to ignore it, tried to return to my routine, but nothing seemed real anymore. TV shows, news, shallow conversations, all seemed purposeless, like a great distraction. I saw people fighting over politics, over ideologies, over things that now I knew were just smokescreens for something much greater. How could I ignore all that? How could I go on as if I hadn't seen what was to come? The truth is, I came back different. Something inside me changed, and I realized that in the first few days after leaving the hospital. Before, I used to worry about small things, bills, work, social media, daily problems. But now, all of that seemed irrelevant. I looked at the people around me and saw how they were trapped in this bubble of distraction, never questioning anything. I heard conversations about TV shows, the latest trends, about artificial conflicts fueled by manipulated news. But no one talked about what really mattered. No one noticed where the world was heading. It was as if I had awakened and was surrounded by people sleeping, completely unaware of what was happening around them. I tried to convince myself that I didn't have an obligation to tell anyone. Who would believe me? Even within my family, there was resistance. When I mentioned that I had seen my deceased mother and felt the presence of Jesus, my husband tried to be understanding, but deep down, I saw doubt in his eyes. "Maybe it was just a dream, Dorothy," he said kindly. My sister suggested that I seek a therapist to deal with the trauma. I could feel that, for them, it was easier to believe that my experience was merely a side effect of the accident than to face the possibility that it was real. But I knew the truth, and the more time passed, the heavier a burden grew inside me. Something told me that I couldn't keep this to myself. The days went by and I tried to stay silent. I tried to convince myself that what I saw was not meant to be shared, that I should just go on with my life and be grateful to have survived. But the truth consumed me from within. I turned on the TV and saw exactly what Jesus had shown me. Manipulation, fear being fueled, divisions being encouraged. It was all there, glaringly obvious, but no one seemed to notice. I began to observe the people around me more closely and realized how many of them were being swept along by this current without even realizing it. I saw friends who had once been close beginning to distance themselves over differences that never mattered before. I saw people fighting over trivial things while the real problem remained invisible. Then something began to happen. Small signs, coincidences that were impossible to ignore. The words I heard during my experience began to echo in my mind at just the right moments. Sometimes, while reading a news story or listening to a conversation, I felt as if someone were telling me, "Look, see, now you understand." It was as if I had been marked in some way, as if now, after all I had seen, I could never live on autopilot again. So, on one quiet night, after another day of pretending that everything was normal, something inside me finally broke. I knelt down and cried. I cried because I knew I could no longer ignore it. I needed to tell. I needed to warn. Even if no one believed me, At first, I didn't know how to begin. Who would listen to me? Who would believe something like this? I thought about talking to a pastor. I thought about writing in a diary. I even thought about forgetting it all altogether. But every time I tried to ignore it, something happened that pulled me back. Small events, words that surfaced at the right moment, that constant feeling that I had been chosen to know this for a reason. So, I decided to write. At first, just for myself, as a way to organize my thoughts. But then I realized I couldn't keep it to myself. If I saw it, it was because I needed to speak. If I was brought back, it was because there was something that needed to be said. So, here I am, writing for anyone who wants to listen, for those willing to question what is happening in the world. I don't expect to convince anyone. I know many will read this and laugh, will say it was just a delirium of a traumatized mind. But for those who feel deep in their hearts that something is wrong, that things are not as they seem, I say, you're not crazy. The truth is before us, but it takes courage to see it. I don't know exactly why I was chosen to see all of this, but I know I can't keep silent any longer. I know what I saw is real. And I know that at some point, each of us will have to choose which side we're on. Since I started sharing my experience, I noticed something curious. Some people distanced themselves from me, as if they didn't even want to hear about what I had experienced. Others, however, sought me out in secret, telling me that they too felt that something was wrong in the world, that they had also noticed small signs, but never had the courage to speak. That made me understand that there are more awakened people than we imagine. They just fear being seen as crazy. And that fear is exactly what keeps everything as it is. Because while everyone thinks they're alone in their doubts, no one comes together to question what really matters. And that is exactly what the invisible system feeds on: fear, silence, conformity. From the moment I returned from that place, I realized that life here would never be the same for me. I can't simply go back to being the person I was before. I can't pretend that I don't know, because now I know. And if I know, it means I have a choice. Either I ignore it and pretend nothing happened, or I do what I was brought back to do. I choose to speak. I choose to warn. I choose not to be just another person who accepts everything passively, even if they call me crazy, even if they ridicule me, because the truth that I saw is greater than any fear, but there is still something that unsettles me. Since I returned, I have been closely observing the events around me, and each day I notice more signs that what I saw wasn't a distant vision, an unlikely future. No, everything is already in motion. Changes are happening slowly, silently, so that no one notices. People are being conditioned to accept small things that, in isolation, seem harmless, but which are part of something much greater. Everything that Jesus showed me is not a possibility. It is a sequence of events that has already begun. And that gives me a strange feeling, as if I were watching a script unfold before my eyes, but no one else could see it. And perhaps that is the hardest part to bear. I'm not a prophet, I'm not a preacher, I'm not anyone special. I'm just an ordinary person who saw what shouldn't have been seen and was brought back with a burden I don't know how to carry. But at the same time, I know I can't keep this to myself. If I was brought back, there is a reason. If you are reading this and feel something inside you, a discomfort, a doubt, a sense that something is not right, then maybe you too are beginning to see. And if you are, please do not ignore it. I know many will read this and think I'm exaggerating, that all of this is nothing more than a misinterpretation of a traumatic moment. But the truth is that, since I returned, nothing seems normal to me anymore. There are days when I catch myself observing the world around me and feel as if I were looking from the outside, seeing everything with different eyes. I see how people react to news without questioning, how they accept changes without noticing what is behind them. I see how distractions increase, how technology advances by leaps and bounds, offering convenience, but gradually taking away the freedom of choice. Before, perhaps I wouldn't have noticed. Before, I too would have gone on without thinking. But now I can't anymore. And the most frightening thing is that sometimes I feel that something or someone wants me to be silent. Not in an explicit way, but in small things. Strange problems with my phone when I talk about it, unexpected difficulties every time I try to write about my experience. The feeling that I am being watched when I touch on this subject. It may be a coincidence, it may be paranoia, but after what I saw, after knowing that something is operating in the unseen, I can't simply ignore it. Because if there is a spiritual war happening, then it makes sense that those who try to warn are silenced. And if that's the case, then I am on the right path. Since I started speaking, I realized that the truth is unsettling. Some people tell me to forget it, to move on and be grateful for being alive, as if I could simply erase everything I saw. Others look at me with pity, as if I were dealing with an unresolved trauma. But there are those who listen in silence, people who don't laugh, who don't try to convince me that it was just a delirium. They just listen, because somehow they already felt that something was wrong, but didn't know how to put it into words. And these are the people I continue to speak to those who deep down already know that the world is not quite what it seems, and the only thing I can say is pay attention. Observe the signs. Do not accept everything passively. What I saw may seem distant, but if you look closely, you will realize that it is already happening, gradually, in small changes that no one questions. The real battle will not be fought with weapons or armies, but with control, with deception, with the illusion that everything is fine. But it isn't, and at some point, each of us will have to choose. I don't know how far all this will go. I don't know how much time we have until the world reaches that point I saw, but I know we are already on our way. And I know that when things become more evident, many will still choose to ignore it. Because the truth scares. It's easier to pretend that everything is under control, that we are simply evolving, that changes are natural. But for those who feel the same discomfort I do, for those who have already begun to see the pieces coming together, I say, don't let it pass. If you are seeing, if you are feeling that something is not right, then maybe you have been chosen to see. And if that is the case, then there is only one choice left. You can ignore it and go on as if nothing were happening, or you can prepare. You can open your eyes, you can speak, you can choose not to be another piece manipulated by this great game. I know many still won't believe, and that's okay. I know I will. Be called crazy, I know I will be discredited. But it doesn't matter, because I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know that at some point, each of us will have to face this truth for ourselves. And when that day comes, I hope it won't be too late.